Good evening. Welcome. It is another Tuesday night, and we are glad you're joining us tonight. If you are joining for the first time, we ask or we give the opportunity that you ask questions, and you can put those in the chat box. We see that chat box live with some delay, sometimes 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds. I have no idea even how long it is these days, but it's usually pretty short. We'll field those as they come in. If you have a question that's just way off topic, we open it up at the end for 20, 30 minutes of what we'll call open forum or topic free. And so tonight we're talking about, is God holding you back? I've heard this perception. Honestly, one of the things I've enjoyed the most about being a Christian and being saved, and I think a lot of that comes out in the way you preach and challenge people, is this idea, which I guess should be the norm for pastoring and discipleship, but the idea of learning the difference between the reality of God and the perception of man, and how the two often don't.
Man's perception.
Okay. Yeah, or of life in general,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So there's reality, which is life as God made it,
Yeah.
and then there's man's perception in all areas of life,
Okay.
which sometimes don't even include God, right?
Right.
And so I read this scripture, and we've mentioned this scripture several times throughout the last couple of years of doing this podcast now. The scriptures in Acts chapter 17, Paul's in Athens, and he sees this. They have all these altars built to different gods, and he sees this altar that says "to the unknown God." And without going into all the backstory and everything that's happening around this time frame, he begins to talk to them, leveraging that sign. And he says, "I have come to proclaim to you the God whom you worship without knowing." And so he goes into this description of God, which is literally my favorite scripture in the entire Bible, because it really does paint a perfect picture of the reality of God, who God is, right? And where man fits in this whole picture. But he says in verse 24, he says, "God who made the world and everything in it, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life, breath, and all things, and he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings," which is an awesome and powerful quote. And then he says, "so that they should seek the Lord in hope that they might grope for him and find him, though he is not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being."
Yeah.
So we always mention, and honestly, you could say the premise of this podcast is to talk about surrendering to Jesus. That's what we do when we evangelize. That's the essence of being a Christian. We've talked about specifically in the last few podcasts. And so this is a perfect connection into what we've already been talking about. But this idea of surrendering really can be seen as this giving something up. I'm giving up for God. I'm giving up this thing or that lifestyle.
How are you saying that when you say what you just said? How do you mean that we are giving something up?
When we surrender.
When we surrender, we're giving something up. Because I don't feel that way at all.
Like I said, it can be seen that way.
Yeah.
So
well, that was what I was asking.
Yeah.
Are you saying that this is the perception that people have?
That's the perception that people have.
Okay,
Correct. Yeah. So when we talk, it was like, I don't want to give this up. I don't want to give that up. Right.
Okay.
But then you think about things Jesus says, "I came that they might have life more abundantly."
Yeah.
And then another quote, "He who seeks to save his life will lose it, but he who loses his life for my sake will find it." So again, reality and then our perception.
Yeah.
We're very different. Now, when you read that can be super confusing right off the bat. What does that even mean? So I'll ask you that as the first question. What does Jesus mean when he says, "He who seeks to save his life will lose it, and he who loses his life for my sake will find it"?
Well, it's clear, if you can let God be God and let God be perfect and let God create the world the way that he wanted to create it, rather than you afterwards deciding to become his supervisor, then it's very clear, because he says if you love your life, you're going to lose it. In other words, life came from God. It didn't come from you.
Mm.
It came from God, and God gave it to us as a gift. But if we take ownership of it, then we're going to ruin our lives. That's basically what he's saying. But if we will relinquish ownership of our lives, then we will find life.
Mm. So the topic, and I'll just start with the topic so that way we don't jump into a whole bunch of confusion later on, but is God holding you back?
Mm.
The reason why I called it that is because according to this scripture that we read in Acts, our freedom, our perceived freedom, is within boundaries, always.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
but the thing is, when we talk to people about Jesus, often the response is, I don't want to relinquish my freedom.
Yeah.
And so let's just kind of use this podcast to like set the whole stage straight. Let's set the whole thing straight. What is the reality of our control, God's control? What is, I've asked about God's sovereignty recently. What does God's sovereignty mean in all things?
Yeah.
And then what are the boundaries that we operate, that God has set?
Yeah.
And how do those apply to the individual?
Yeah. Well, this is what makes the Bible such a critical part of the whole idea of Christianity, because the Bible is Christianity. The Bible defines, it doesn't just define the boundaries, it defines everything.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is defined. I've taken a little bit of a break from this book, but I had mentioned this book. It's talking about how the Bible works. That's the idea, and it's totally wrong. I mean, the guy who's written this, he's a university professor who is claiming to be a Christian, and he hasn't a clue, how this works. I came across it. Actually, I'm not even sure how I came across it exactly. It came just through Audible. I just saw it and thought, it should be an interesting read. But the fundamental problem is he's coming from the standpoint, which is why we do this as humans. I really don't understand. But it comes from the perspective that somehow once God created us, He created us in such a way that we have this potential for full autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not true. It's just not true. We will never be fully autonomous. We will not have the ability to have complete control over every facet of our lives. It hasn't even been given to us. So we just start from there, So whatever we do, whatever decisions we make to disobey God, we still stay underneath the realm of the boundaries that God has created.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's to me it's puzzling. Fascinating was not exactly the right thing, because I'm not really enjoying this, but it's puzzling to me to watch people and watch them live out their version of life, and violating rules, and in their minds they're totally not concerned. It's like it'll be fine. It'll be fine. And it's like they might as well go ahead and say it'll be fine. God has no jurisdiction over my life. I found a way out from underneath the laws and principles
Mm-hmm.
of God. I've been able to go around them, and now I now live in a universe of my own making.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, that would be the only thing that would the only thing that would make sense, is that that's actually what they believe. They believe they have created their own universe without that God doesn't exist in. And so now everything's going to work for them. And it's like I said, it's puzzling, because there's never, why anybody would think that there's a possibility for, to be completely 100% in control of your life is really doesn't have a very firm grasp on reality.
Yeah. We have a question here. Are you saying if you love your life, this is going back to what you said the first time. Are you saying that if you love your life more than loving God, you can lose what you have?
No, it's not loving your life more than loving God. It's the idea that you you're this is your life to shape how you feel. Because the idea of love, again, it talks a lot in the Bible, is this, you have to understand, it's this idea of commitment. Is that we are committed to building a life for ourselves. That's what Jesus is talking about. When you've decided, I'm going to have a life that looks like this, it's going to be exactly like this, you're going to lose it, because what you're going to do, I've over the years, I've talked about it a lot, that people, there is a way, there is a way to live life, and there are paths to life. But there are always those who want to blaze their own trail. And this is the problem with blazing your own trail. So if you want to go from New York to California with the ways that are available to us today, you can do it in about 6 hours, okay? Because you can go to the airport, get on a plane, and fly on a plane according to a schedule, and probably within 6 hours or so, you're in California. Now, if you want to do it your way without the help of anybody else, it's probably going to take you probably 6 months or longer. And that's if you actually survive the trip. If you just, you decide you're going to build your own transportation, you decide you're going to start making your way across the country, and you're going to live off the land, you're going to make your own food, like in the during the pioneer days, 6 months or longer. And you may die along the way, but both ways you're trying to do the same thing, and that's what I'm talking about. That's why the Bible talks about, because there is a way to have a life. But if you have to have life this way, if it has to work this way, and all the little components that have to do with life have to be made by you, you're never going to have a life. There's not enough time. There's not enough time. You won't make, relatively speaking, you won't make 4 steps before your life's over, because there's just not enough time for you to fabricate every single element that is life, and Jesus says, if you'll do it my way, you'll have life. It's just something that you'll just have. And it's the same life. And that's the thing is so ironic. And you will never know that until you become a Christian and actually do that. You'll never know that. Yeah, I could, as a pastor or preacher, I could preach for the rest of your life, and you will never be convinced of just how close that life is that Jesus has for us as individuals mirrors the life we're trying to make for ourselves by doing it our own way. I mean, they're virtually identical. They're virtually identical. I'd say maybe just a few, looking backwards over 40 years of my life, there's a few tweaks along the way. But where I am today, this is where I'd want to be. Listen, if I was able to sit down and choose my life today, I would have chose where I am today. That's what I would have done. I would have chose to have this. And so that's why I say it's ironic, because we want to spend all this time doing it because we're afraid that God's not going to do it the way we want him to. And he doesn't do it the way we want him to, but he does do it. It does happen. It just doesn't happen the same way. And that's where the problem lies, is that we want to do it our way. And that is only the only difference. And, think about that phrase. I say it a lot. I said it in my sermon on last week. We're just kids. We're kids. When kids say, I can do it. I want to do it my way. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, it's going to take you an hour. It'd take me 5 seconds to show you how to do it the right way. No. I'm going to do it my way. Mm-hmm. Okay. You've just lost an hour of your life. And when you're done, your shoes look just like they did if I tied them. But my way only takes a minute. Yours takes a half an hour, because you don't know what you're doing. But the end result's still the same. And that's the thing I think is so ironic, is that the end result is the same when it comes right down to it. And when you get to be 80 years old, I don't care who you are, 80, 85 years old, and you look at your life will turn out exactly the same way that every 85-year-old life turns out. You're going to die soon. It all ends the same way. It's just so it's not funny. It's ironic, because if you had lived that 85 years the way God said, then when that day came, you won't be any different than any other 85-year-old, except for the fact that you will have lived. End of story.
Yeah.
You'll have lived. You won't have spent that entire time trying to make a life for yourself.
Okay, that actually answers my next question as well. The next one. I was thinking about this story, and it's interesting because I don't remember how old I was. I definitely wasn't 13 yet. I was probably I was probably between 10 and 12, because I remember the house we were living in, and I remember when we started going to the church in San Francisco at the time. I was 13, and this is before that. So I know I was at least I can say I was young enough, probably not to have quite understood what I was doing completely. You might question that statement, but anyway, in my neighborhood, we had like this big park, a whole bunch of kids. We used to hang out together, and we used to love going on what we called little adventures. We'd go out, we'd find sticks, and we'd literally cowboys, Indians, all kinds of stuff. We'd beat each other up. We'd do weird, crazy stuff and terrorize the neighborhood. But I remember one day we saw this guy's porch. These like big Victorian houses. There's always stairs going up to the first floor. There's always a basement. And this guy had like a lattice around his porch, and there was a hole in the lattice. And so, we're adventuring. Yeah. So I go into this lattice, and I see there's an open window. And so I climb inside this window, and we're inside this guy's basement, and his basement was stacked with stuff, just stuff. And so we found this collection of cigar boxes. Probably a dozen, maybe a half dozen of them, like a whole bunch of them. And so multiple trips, we went in, went out, and we took all these cigar boxes back to my house. And on the last trip, I remember having a whole stack of these things. I put them outside the lattice so I could climb out from underneath the deck. And I start climbing out, and I hear, "Hey!" And I look back, and there's this guy sitting up he's a big dude too, and he's sitting up on the ledge, and he's just kind of looking at me. I said, "Hi." And he goes, "Hi." And I said, "See ya." And I grabbed his cigar boxes and took off. and so he graciously came to my house, knocked on the door, told my parents. I got in a ton of trouble. And I didn't know, I'm going to be totally honest. I didn't know I was stealing from this guy.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
I know. I have a similar story.
But while I was studying for this and while I was putting together the thoughts for it, I was thinking about how we do this with God, and we think we can just operate in our life.
Yeah.
And we can take what we want of this life, and we're going to get that. We're going to keep it.
Yeah.
And one day we're going to stand before God. It's like the story of the rich fool.
Yeah.
And he says, "Fool, this day your life or your soul will be required of you. Then whose will all these things be?" And so we have this, mentality of control of our own lives. And so talk about the difference between those two things. Where is God in control? Where are we in control?
Well,
or what are the different realms?
So
of
God
operation?
is in control at a level of. So this is the interesting thing about God, and it was like I mentioned this book, and it just went too far. Is that God really is day by day, moment by moment, hands off. But in terms of how He created the universe, everything is accounted for. Everything is. There's absolutely nothing left to chance. Nothing. In the true sense of the term, and you'd have to study chaos theory to understand what I'm talking about specifically. But the idea is that everything that happens according to laws, and according to precepts of God, and so how things play out in life, it's not God there, your story about this guy, the only difference would be, rather than God looking down on you going, "Hey, what are you doing?" and coming into your parents' house, is the whole thing would be self-punishing. It would just happen. You'd go to open the cigar boxes and your hand would fall off, or you'd cut your fingers off or something like that, and then all the boxes would magically go back to his house. That would be that's how God's world works.
Yeah.
Nothing is out of place with God. Nothing goes unnoticed. It all plays out. It just all plays out. But it plays out. It's funny because I'm working on a sermon idea this weekend that I want to preach this weekend is the or sorry, no, tomorrow. It's tomorrow I'm going to be preaching it. It's just, the longer I'm saved, the more I realize that God is not actively involved in our punishment. It's all self functioning. It's just the way it works. We read these things about giving an account of our life and things like that, and we get this idea of God standing there. Okay, so tell me the story, and then this is our chance to try to wangle out of something, and it just doesn't work. There is nothing. We're going to be there. We're going to be guilty. That's all there's going to be to it. It's not going to be, we're not going to have, 15, 20 minutes of judgment with God, for every person, giving your case and working things out. It's not going to be like that. There's just going to be, rapid fire judgment that's going to be taking place, and people are going to be, like lemmings off of a cliff going into a lake of fire. It's not going to be something that there's this struggle and stuff like that, because it's all, like I said, it's all self-judging, it's all self-functioning. And so, but God's behind it all. But it's this idea, we see God do things, but we miss the idea that the reason for these stories, they are true stories, but what we miss is that they're also principle stories. They're example stories that it may not that scenario may not happen to us, but that kind of scenario will happen to us. That idea, like Ananias and Sapphira, is Ananias and Sapphira, God judges them. They're the first couple in the church that have been, playing games financially with God and with the church. And so God judges them. They both lose their lives and it's all over. Well, I don't know anybody that has ever lost their life. Well, I take that back. I do know one person that lost their life when they were messing with finances, but that was only somebody who had stole money from an offering and then went and bought drugs. And well, it's a good example of what I'm talking about. Is that we had a couple that we were trying to work with, and they were drug addicts, and well, she wasn't, but they were together. And we were trying to work with them, and we were out of town, and somebody else had taken the offering, and they had taken the offering, which I told them not to do this, but they weren't listening. And they took the offering, put it in a bag, and put the bag underneath their seat. And, I told them, you need to put it away somewhere where people can't, see it, where they don't, there's no temptation. So he saw them put the money down there, and he needs drugs. And so he got and stole the offering, and then went out and he bought heroin, but the heroin that he bought was way better than what he normally bought because he had more money to do it with. And so he bought a better quality of heroin, but not realizing that this was a better quality of heroin than what he was used to taking. He killed himself. He overdosed. He killed himself. And so, but God's not in there. God wasn't there. Okay, all right, let's put this. So put that over here. Put that underneath there. We're going to bait the trap because these two, I'm going to judge them. So bait the trap there because they're going to take the money. And then I've got it ready where his friend of his going to give him heroin that he's never had quality before. It's going to kill him. And it's not how it works. Mm-hmm. That's not how it works. It's just simply how life plays out. You disobey God, you sin against God, how life just begins to play out in that way. It's not God doing things to us. And so God's in charge of everything. That's the bottom line, is God's in charge of everything because everything works according to his purpose.
Mm-hmm. So what about man? What do we have control? What does the individual have control over?
Yeah, the only control that we actually have is whether or not we're going to obey or disobey God. That's the only control we have. It's like the Adam and Eve in the garden. That's you can eat freely from all these trees, but you can't eat from that one. Okay, on you go.
Yeah.
So they can do whatever they want now. But they know that they can't eat of that tree, and they know they can eat of every other tree. Well, they can't help themselves. They've got to eat of the tree that God says not to. And then they're convinced, well, at least Eve is anyways, convinced that she's going to get away with it. She doesn't get away with it. It's just not, say, oh yeah, but God jumped in and God judged them and God did this and God did that and God did the other thing. Yes, he did. He did. But, it's it's a story to show you that you don't get away with anything. God doesn't have to be running around making all these things happen.
Yeah.
The stories are there to demonstrate to you this is how it plays out. And it's not that every issue is God personally twisting things around. It's stuff that just it happens on its own. But it is God. It is God, and God is behind it, and God has created these principles and laws in the world that are there's the world is I don't really have a word for it beyond autonomous, but the world itself is self-functioning. It meters out its own justice in its own way. And oh, well, I know people who've gotten away with this, that, and the other thing. You say they've gotten away with it, but you don't have to live their life.
Yeah.
You think getting away with it is not going to prison, but they have to live in the prison of their own doing. And that's a whole nother thing. And oh yeah, but they're not even remorseful or anything. Do you understand what it's like to do something harmful to another person and have no remorse? You think that that's a good way to live?
Yeah.
You think that they come home and go, oh, I got away with it, and they've got this intellectual thing going on in their head where they're really enjoying all of the same things in life that we do. No, there are parts of their body, their mind that's shutting down, and they're living in this environment that's worse than living in a penitentiary.
So, thinking about this idea of Adam and Eve, actually, I put this in the notes, but do you think, well, let me just ask the question for the sake of the topic. Was God holding Adam and Eve back in any way? This is like, because it is kind of the temptation, wasn't it? No, God said if we eat of this fruit, we'll die.
Yes.
And the devil says, you will not die, for God knows that when you eat of it, you will become like gods, knowing good and evil. And it's like that the saying that people, the whole Christianity is a crutch type of mentality. It's like, so without this Christianity thing, we could actually walk freely. We could actually walk on both legs. And
well, that's the delusion. That is the delusion, is that if you don't do things God's way, then you won't have to rely on God. And there is a partial truth to that. Because if you're not doing things God's way, you don't have to rely on God. But that's the problem, is the things that you're doing that you're not doing God's way, they are the problem. So you won't need God to help you with your problems because your life is going to be just problems. So you're right. You won't need God to help you with your problems because your life will be one big problem. So there's nothing to help you with. Because even if God came in and tried to fix it, it would be impossible. If he just simply wanted to tinker with, bits and pieces of things to try to help you to have a better life, it still wouldn't work. Because you're going the wrong direction.
Yeah. So when we surrender to God, what is it we're actually what are we actually surrendering? What does it really mean? Because
I know you're surrendering your insanity. We're not surrendering anything valuable to God. To God, like the scripture you read earlier, Acts 17, God doesn't need our worship.
Yeah.
There's nothing that God needs. The number of Christians that I know of that go on and on about how God needs our worship, it's just totally fictitious. God doesn't need our worship, and the Bible even says so. It's not. We are lucky that we get the opportunity to do so. That's the truth about worship, is we are lucky that we are able to worship God.
Yeah.
And there's no point in trying to go into the great details of that, because it's something you can only understand through experience. I'm constantly, I went to Chick-fil-A today and stopped in front of the car, or stopped in front of the church, and was eating in the car. And I'm thanking God for my life, just in general. There's just so many things that God, I'm so thankful. I'm so grateful for what you've done. But I didn't pray over my food, and I recognized that I hadn't prayed over my food, and I thought, it doesn't even matter. I'm thankful for everything. It's like I'm constantly thanking God for everything. So it's like it's the idea of Father, thank you for this food and bless it to our bodies in Jesus' name. I still to this day I mock my kids over it because I never taught them how to pray like that, but they pray like that. And it's like, why do you pray like that? Is it just such a weird prayer? You bless it to our bodies. It's like if you're eating,
Yeah,
if you're eating a donut, it's not going to bless it to your body. I'm sorry. It's just no way about it. You're going to reap the consequences of eating a donut,
yeah, yeah.
and there's nothing, no prayer in the world is going to change that, but, but the general attitude of thankfulness, that's a whole nother story,
Yeah.
And this idea of these little rules and regulations and little things we want to play with, when God's involved in every detail of our lives, just being, if you're just thankful, for what he has done, and you live in that's what I call worship. That's a worshipful way to live. And that's only beneficial to me. That's not beneficial to God.
So what is worship? And in the I'm actually working through John. He's talking to in John 4, he's talking to a woman, and she says, our father worship. There's this little conversation. Our father's worshiping this mountain, and he says, you worship that which you do not know.
Yeah.
And then he goes into this idea of worshiping in spirit and truth. But then he says, for God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth.
Yeah.
So what is worship, and then what is worshiping in spirit and truth?
Well, worship, the word worship is simply having placing value. It's just the idea of value, and so that's why I say we are fortunate to be able to worship. The reason why people don't worship is because they don't value God, and the reason why they don't value God is because they've never experienced anything valuable about God, and that's their loss. All the way around. It's not God's loss, because God lives in the land of valuable. That's his existence. And so for somebody like myself, who is a constant worshiper, the reason is because I get to live the valuable of God's existence. And so that's, to me, so fortunate. I all the time, I sat down on the couch next to my wife. It was like beginning of last week or somewhere around there. And I told her, I said, I'm so glad that I married you. And I'm so glad that we're saved, because I have been trying to counsel marriages this week, and several of them, and they're disasters. And the reason is very simple. It's because people just do not want to obey God. They got to do it their own way. They have to do it their own way. And they cannot figure out how to not do it their own way. And I told one person, I said, you're fighting. I said, you both of you have guns pointed at yourselves, and you are firing away, and you're hoping to hurt the other one. But you're firing all your ammunition, and you keep aiming harder and harder and harder, and you think one of these is going to hit the mark, and I'm going to really win this fight, but you're only shooting at yourself. And the concept is just so hard for people to understand, is that when you fight against God, then you're the one who ends up losing. You never win when you fight against God. There's no point. That's why I've titled my sermon tomorrow, why fight against God? Is that's the idea, is what do you expect to win by fighting against God? Because God's never lost a battle. So how do you expect to be well, first of all, why do you expect to be the first one? And the second thing is why even try in the first place?
Why did God, this is a question that came in, why did God create us? We have nothing to give God. We have nothing he needs. Do we actually know yet why he created us?
It's a very good question. The question, in me, personal opinion, not, there's biblical support for it, but it is the nature of God. The Bible says God is love. And so love is a commitment. It's very difficult to be able to express love when your only commitments are to yourself. And so creating man in his image, doing everything that is possible to put man in an environment whereby man can have interaction with God, to be as autonomous as possible, you know, um, and with the possibility of having something to be committed to, you know, that's worthy to be committed to. It's like that's if you think about just marriage in general, and that's why marriage is such an imagery through the Bible, is in a marriage, when a marriage is working correctly, you're doing everything you can to uh to to um trying to think of the right words to say, but your focus is on the other person, and um, how you can please, how you can make the other person happy. So when a marriage is working properly, that's what you have. Is you have two people that are living their lives with the intentions of making life easier for the other person. And it's not a concept that's even remotely practiced in the majority of the world today, and even within Christianity, it's very limited practice as well. It's always about me, and you give me what I want, and which is demonic. I mean, it's just flat out demonic, because everything the devil does is always the polar opposite of God. And so it's like, no, that's the ideas we're supposed to be. The Bible says, I mentioned that scripture, thinking of other people more highly than ourselves. That this is the whole idea, is we're supposed to be living our life with this concept, with this point of view, that we're actually trying to help everybody else. We're not trying to get everybody else to help us. We're trying to help everybody else. Well, that says something about how self-sufficient God created us. If we could be like that, if we could be in such a way that we could help other people. And if you think about it, isn't that the ultimate definition of God? God is self-sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
But what does he do with his self-sufficiency? He creates a world, he creates people, and then he is working continuously with those people to try to teach them the concepts of true autonomy, true self-sufficiency, which is the giving of yourself, to others. And so that really is, what you're seeing there, and why God created us, is to have something to demonstrate that, because that is, how does God demonstrated his love to us, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. So that whole idea of God dying for us and demonstrating his love while we were yet sinners shows that he wasn't doing that to satisfy something in us. He was doing that to satisfy something in himself.
So what is the I had this question perfectly formulated, and then I read this question, and it just gone. But I have this a list of things here. They're boundaries. They are boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
They're boundaries we operate within. And I guess what I'll do is I'll mention them. And you just tell me how this works. They're all easy concepts, but the first one is time. He actually says in the scripture that we just read that he has determined their pre-appointed times, and he tells the disciples, it's not for you to know the times and the seasons.
Yeah.
And so clearly this is a limit God has given us.
Yeah, time is really God's way of putting things in order, because he didn't need time. He exists outside of the realm of time, and he's quite comfortable without there being time. Me trying to grasp the concept is almost useless to even try. And because you read in Revelations, and the first thought that came to me in Revelations is, when we're getting these glimpses into heaven and things are happening A, B, C, D, are they really happening A, B, C, D? When we look into, because heaven's not bound by time. How do we know that it isn't D, A, B, C? We don't know that these things are in a particular order, just because of time. Now, I concede that it's probably there probably is our perception that it's in this order, because we're bound by time. We are people bound by time. The whole idea of trying to go into eternity it just boggles my mind. I'm sure that there's got to be something God does in us that satisfies our dependency, on time,
Mhm.
and so you know so so I think time is just a helping hand, for us, to be able to understand concepts, and things happening in time. Probably, I think that's, probably one of the best teachers, to me, is the number of times that I think, oh, if I could just turn the clock back 5 minutes, how the disasters I could have averted. I thought about that the other day when I was parking my car, and I rubbed the side of the tree, and I wasn't. It was the irony of it is that I was trying to figure out how to do this better. This parking is, I have 2 inches clearance, like on the tree and the house, to get into this parking space. It's not really for a parking space, but it's for us to get. There's the only way we can get in. So those 2 inches, I'm thinking, and I'm usually, the way I compensate by it is being like an inch away from the house, and it's like I'm eventually going to hit the house because that's on my side, the left side, because I'm backing in as well. And so I'm thinking, I've got to do this. So I get out and I think, oh, it's not, I don't have 2 inches. I've actually got, there's 2 inches on this side, and there's probably another 10 inches on that side. So I thought, oh, you know what? Okay, let me get a feel for this so I can figure it out. So I get out of the car, I'm looking at the car, I move the car so it's right in the middle of it. I get in the car and I'm sitting in the car and I'm looking around and I'm trying to get all these, sort of reference points working in my mind so that I can just pull right back into the middle of these things. And so I thought, okay, so now I'm going to start pulling backwards, and the car slips. And it slips into the cutout where the tree is, and it goes right up against the tree. And I get out of the car and I go over, and the tree's like this. My car is up against it. Haven't scratched anything yet, but there's no moving the car. And there's no moving the tree. That's just not going to happen. Nothing's going to happen. I now am going to have to get back in the driver's seat and scratch my car on purpose. The question is, which way's the least scratching? Yeah. So it's like, do I try to go forward and get out, or do I go backwards and get out? And so I thought, the wheel in the front of the car, if I turn the wheel as far as I possibly can, that's going to come away, but it's still going to come away at an angle, and I'm going to scratch the car. There's just no two ways about it. And so I come away from that. But as I'm sitting in the car, I'm thinking how nice it would have been if I could have just gone back 2 minutes from now and say, you know what? Just keep parking the way that you've been parking, and you won't have a scratched car. Yeah. And I think that really is, what time is all about for us, is how to learn. Mm-hmm. Okay, I won't do that again, because you can't take it back. You can't take it over.
Here's another question, and then I'll get back to the list here. There are lots of people who choose not to be married, whether because of no desire for marriage or because of bad marital examples. I'm not clear if this is biblically frowned on or if it's optional. I'm also taking ministry in mind as I ask.
Okay, I'm not sure. Is there a question involved in that, or not exactly clear on?
I don't have my glasses on, but I don't see a question mark.
Yeah, my part on that. I mean, I don't frown on marriage.
Oh, I'm not clear if this is biblically frowned on or if it's optional.
What, to not get married?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So this is, that's a whole concept for a whole podcast. That's because.
Are you saying you want to do a podcast on it? Or?
No, okay, not necessarily. No, because biblically speaking, there's some very, very practical elements of this, is that the less interactive you are with other people, the less you really know about life. And so if you're going to be a single person trying to give, ministry, to give marriage counseling, you're going to be great at it, because you don't have a clue. You have no idea what you're talking about. And so that's you're looking, to me, you're looking at something that is going to be a self-imposed difficulty, because if you've not had to work through a marriage on your own and done it successfully, you don't know what a successful marriage looks like. You can't just spout scriptures and pontificate, so that's That's a bit of a rough one. If you want to be a minister in the true sense of the term, then you need to be a good example of everything that you're ministering in. So if you're not a good example of a marriage, or a good example of, other things in life, then you're already kind of disqualified. And so, people love to point to the Apostle Paul. They don't have any other examples. They just have that one, but that's good enough for those who despise marriage. And I can tell you that those who despise marriage, the Bible does frown on people who despise marriage, because marriage is of God. So, but that's probably as far as I should go in.
Okay. This is an interesting one. I was gonna say a couple other ones, but I wanted to touch on this one. We're getting short on time, and it's not like I wanted to focus on this, but I'm gonna ask the question. I want to ask it a certain way, on purpose, specifically because of right now. But the issue of gender, and not that, like I said, I want to focus on this idea, but we live in an interesting society, and gender has become a very confusing thing to talk about in a lot of groups. And so, because this is a boundary. God created them male and female, right? And then you have this idea of gender confusion.
Yeah.
And so, what do you say about the parameters of male and female and the boundaries that God has set for that? What do you say to the gender confused?
Yeah. Well, this is the problem with this whole thing, is that there's a lot of topics in life now that have become soundbited, and so you have, if you do some research on the topic, these are the kinds of things that usually what happens is that people fall into categories, and not just with the gender issue, but with lots of issues like this, is medically, scientifically, morally, biblically, or religiously, we could say, in all these factors, you'll find that it's a mixed bag. In every way, it's a mixed bag. There's no clarity, to say this is okay, and this is not okay. And what I mean by that is, I mean the idea of the gender confusion, the idea that there are people that don't genuinely know what sex they are. Or other factors. There's lots of these kinds of issues in life now. But you have to stop and ask the question, when a 5-year-old, when a parent of a 5-year-old is dressing their child, in some way to reflect gender confusion, or some sort of that there's a boy in a girl's body, or girl in a boy's body, or whatever. When you're dealing with that, you're always dealing with, this is something personal. This is a personal agenda. Agenda is probably too hard of a word. I don't really want it to be like it's a hard thing, but it's an ideology. It's something that you believe in, and you want to pass this on to your kids. It's the kid isn't this. This isn't the kid. This isn't the kid expressing this. This is the parent expressing this through the kid. And so when you have things like that, it's time to start questioning some of those things. When you have doctors that are willing to do sex changes on teenagers, it's time to start questioning the integrity of those decisions, because those decisions are being made, in a sense, by the professional. The professional's the one making the decision for the individual who's not sure of where things stand. And now you are moving things in a direction instead of letting things take their own course. The issue of homosexuality in general, that's been around for a long, long, long time. the question of it and the facts behind it. But again, like I said, when you start looking at more broad spectrum, at these, you find that it's just not. They're not clear-cut issues. They're just not cut and dry. It's like this is right or this is wrong. And when I mean this is right or this is wrong, what I mean is that there's some sort of thing that's just settled everything, and so even from the standpoint of God, it's like, okay, so if you have homosexual tendencies and you want to be a Christian, you got to get rid of them. So, well, it's more complicated than that. It's not that simple. Of just you just need to not be a homosexual anymore, because Christianity is not homosexuality is not acceptable to Christianity. End of story. And that's it. It's just not that cut and dry. There's so much more behind the scenes, and I'm talking out of personal experience of becoming a Christian and having experienced all kinds of sin in my life before I got saved, and then, wanting to be able to help people to understand this. And this isn't God just telling us what to do. This is God having our best interests in mind. And we have gone down paths that have caused problems for us. Like I said, those ideas, the hand falling off and the cigar boxes going back to their original. This is stuff that's happening to us because of sin decisions that we're making. And so this is a real problem, is that we're getting involved, we're getting engaged in sin, and sin is having a corrupting influence on us. And that's what's causing the problems with gender confusion and those kinds of things, is because it's the sin in our lives that has upended the reference points. And so now we're not functioning from reference points anymore. And that's the problem. So I can be sympathetic. Somebody comes into the church, and I'm this or I'm that. I am gender confused. I've had a sex change, or I've done this or I've done that, or whatever. There's never a time where I look at them and say, you know what, there's the door. Just turn around and go back out, because you're never going to make it. It's always the same question. I honestly don't know how well this is going to work. Because you've traveled broadly, and done a lot of things, and it's going to be very difficult for you to be able to undo some of the decisions that you've made in life. And so it's just cut and dry, and there's going to be a time period, of where, because you're not going to, it's physically possible that you could just make 100% right decisions within 15 minutes, but the chances of that actually happening are very slim, because we're still trying to work out what the right choice is. And so, but it's being able to put precept upon precept, line upon line, here a little, there a little, which the scripture talks about, which is how God works with us. Is God works with us to say, okay, all right, you're over here, you're going this way, you're gonna hit a brick wall, you keep going that way, you decide, no, I want to make eternal heaven my home, I want eternal life. Okay, fine. Well, we need to turn right a little bit. And then you're going to need to turn right a little bit more. And then you're going to need to turn right a little bit more. And you're going to have to keep turning right for the next probably 5 years of your life. And then eventually you're going to be going back the other direction from where you came. But you'll be able to understand that you're not going backwards. You're now going in the right direction. Right. Yeah. You somehow during life got turned around and you're going the wrong direction, thinking you're going the right direction. And so there's just so many factors that are involved in that. But see, that's the good news, is that things are also correctable. So no matter how jacked up things get, there's always a way to turn things around. It's just hard. It's not easy, because you've damaged the circuitry of your mind, by the decisions we make in sin. We should think of our minds as a very, 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 very complicated computer, and millions of transistors, and a lot of them are blown out and they need to be replaced, and because of sin. And so our perceptions of things, like what you said in the beginning, our perceptions of things are wrong. And God comes in and he just starts putting those transistors back in place. And then all of a sudden you realize, wow, I was way off course on that. Yep. Okay. So we got that circuit fixed. Well, now we've got 1,000 other circuits still. So that's the thing that we have to be careful of, is understanding when you're dealing with anything like that, is that you're talking about short circuits in our ability to reason and to rationalize that have been blown out, circuits that have been blown out that have to be repaired. And the only way they can be repaired is by reading the Word of God, praying, being in church, and being around people who are recovering, that people who have had experiences, where my circuitry was blown out and, God fixed it. And they can actually speak things. There's people that come to church and they just come to church on Sunday and they never get fixed, because they don't come to church enough. It's just not. This isn't. We don't just show up here so we can just worship God. This is like a hospital. It'd be like It's like going into a hospital and going, okay, so I got 10 minutes. I think I have cancer, but you got 10 minutes. If you can fix it in 10 minutes, I'm good with that. But if not, well, I'll just have to live with the cancer. It's not. You're going to have to do some invasive surgery.
Yeah. So there's a question I'm going to read. We're going to go a little bit over, and I'm kind of torn because I want to keep going this direction. But the question on is what exactly do you mean by the surgeon is really the one to make the decision? And this was actually mentioned before this, but
I know
is the surgeon still making the decision? Well, if the individual signs a form saying they want to change.
Because here you have somebody. There's when a counselor or a minister or anybody who's in any kind of position of working with the public, a psychiatrist, something like that, has sex with their client, that's not acceptable. That's not acceptable at all, because there's a problem. Because of the way that this works, and so if you get into a sexual relationship with one of your clients, like I said, a pastor with a congregation member, through counseling and psychologists and doctors and things like that, get sexually, there's a version of rape that's occurred there, because they're using their professional opinion, and they are predators. They're becoming predators. And that's what I'm talking about, is a surgeon who's has in their mind, they're for this, they're pro this. They think this is the answer for this person's life, because they are pro sex change. It's only in that particular situation, but in that situation, but the person who's getting the sex change is trusting their advice. It's a similar kind of a thing. And that's what I'm talking about. It's a similar kind of a thing. So signing any, you could be, I could be a predator minister, who takes advantage of people's feelings and stuff like that, and say, listen, we can't have sex until you sign this paper. And then when you sign this paper, we can have sex. I'm just taking advantage of them.
Yeah.
It's not, that's getting them to sign the paper doesn't mean they understand. It just means that now it's legal. And that is the problem with what I'm talking about there, is that, you have somebody who comes in there, they're 30 years old, they thought this out and they've considered this and they've decided, no, I want a sex change and I don't care what anybody cares about that or not, or whatever. Okay, go find a surgeon and have it done. That's fine. That's all on you. But what I'm talking about, the things that we need to be careful of, is that when these kinds of things start making their way down into the grade schools, or middle schools, and you have these kinds of life-changing decisions that are being made in people's lives, and they're going to affect the rest of their life, because of this decision, and it's become okay for professional people to make those decisions for them. Now that's right, and that was what my whole statement was. We need to evaluate, we need to reevaluate that and ask ourselves the question, are we really flowing with what's really happening, or is this an agenda that's being pushed forward?
Yeah.
So that's what I'm talking about.
So I want to ask two more questions, and you can answer them both at the same time if you want. But because I think that'd be kind of the same answer for both. But again, I'm tying all this together, and then we'll, as a matter of fact, you guys can throw in your off-topic questions if you have any, and we'll get to those next. But this idea of being a man and being a woman, and not just on the gender confusion front, but down to this idea that, I'm a man, but you can't put me in a box. You know what I mean? I don't have to act a certain way.
Right.
You know what I mean? And a woman as well. What? I just because I'm a woman, I have to be a wife and a baby maker, and this is just you put me in a box.
Yeah.
But when you read the Bible and you read it objectively, you see that that wasn't the intention for either. It wasn't like God, you're going to live in this box.
Yeah.
It was this, there is this, what you said in the beginning, you know, he who seeks to save his life will lose it, but he who loses his life for my sake will find it.
Yeah.
And there's this genuine pleasure and joy in being a man within the parameters that God set.
Well,
and
that's
living life in general.
Yeah, that's
right?
the point of what I was referring to with what I said earlier about those issues when you first brought that up about a man and woman, is that we're really looking at the issues of sin and what sin has done to the circuitry of our thinking. You know, you have to be in a position to regularly counsel people to understand that people really do believe that what is going on inside of their head is reality. That it's just, that's all there is to it. This is reality. This is what's happening is real. Okay. Everything I'm thinking, everything that's going on in my head, this is real. And it's almost impossible to communicate or to convince somebody who's set, you know, this is what's going on. It's almost impossible to communicate. No, you know, that isn't what's going on. I remember being in a counseling session with a friend of mine. We were literally there for 4 or 5 hours. The woman was convinced that the people who lived up above her were always talking about her. And he asked, he said, how do you know? And she said, I could hear them. And he said, how do you hear them? She says, I can hear them through the floor. So you can hear them clearly through the floors if they're talking right in front of you? Yes. Can you hear them right now? And she'd listen. And she'd go, well, they're not talking right now, but when they're talking, I can hear them, you know? And I mean, for 4 hours trying to explain to her, listen, maybe they're not talking about you. And she finally, after about 4 hours said, because he would say, you know, so what did they say? Well, I couldn't make out exactly what they say, but I know they were talking about me. And she just kept going on and on like this. And he said, if you can't really nail down like a sentence of what they were saying, could it possibly be that you didn't hear them? That maybe you did hear them, but it sounded like something else and that it wasn't really what they said? And she finally, yeah, okay, maybe it might be that they might not be talking about. But in her mind, this was just, she was convinced. And I know a lot of people like that. I've counseled tons of people like that, as they say, this is what's happening. And it's like, are you sure? How do you know this is happening? What convinced you that this is happening? Does anybody else know this is happening? You know, and you start to try to focus the attention away from that, you know, personal experience to shared experience. You know, are there other people who heard this? Is there anybody who knows, you know, this is the truth? You know, I've had people, you know, come to me and they say, you know, everybody in the church, and then they'll tell me something and I'll go, how do you know everybody in the church thinks that way? How do you know that that's the opinion of everybody? Have you asked everybody? And then I'll say, is it my opinion? Well, no, it's not your, okay. Is it so-and-so's opinion? Somebody who I know is probably not their opinion. Okay, well, not them. Okay, so they're, you know, so how many is everybody? You know, is everybody like everybody or is everybody like 3? You know, because they're just convinced because they've heard one person say something. This is automatically how everybody thinks. And it's a, you know, trying to get people to understand that there's stuff that's going on inside of our heads. It's just not reality. It's just not reality. Very, very difficult. Very difficult to get people to see that. And that's why a lot of this becomes so complicated.
Okay. So it's interesting because you're again, we're talking about the mentality that God's boundaries are somehow holding us back. But if Adam and Eve hadn't, well, let me ask it as a question. What if Adam and Eve hadn't eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? What would have happened?
Well, it's almost laughable because it's like, okay, so this is the deal, Adam. No eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Okay, he apparently either shared this with his wife or it was reset again to Eve specifically. And then the devil comes along and the devil gives his little thing and no, you'll be like God, knowing good and evil. And she goes, no, not into it. Okay, well, there'd really be no need for a Bible There'd be no need for further story. We would just be living it. If we all did that, if that was all of us, we would just be living in a garden, a fantastic garden, being able to do anything that we wanted freely, eating from every tree except for the knowledge of good and evil. We'd be able to eat from the tree of life and live forever. It would be, we had everything. Yeah, I mean, we had everything. It's the whole idea that paradise lost. We had everything. I mean, we literally had everything. And we gave it up for what we perceived up here, and that people are still doing that to this day. And it's not going to end until it's over, when it's all over, and, everybody who's in hell's in hell, everybody who's in heaven is in heaven. And that's why I preach so much on the mind, because that really is the issue, is that there's a group of people who live in the fantasy of their mind, and then there's a group of people who live for God. And there's, the people who are going to be in heaven are going to be the people who live for God. The people who live in the fantasy of their mind are not going to be there. And the sad part is that I believe, again, me, personal opinion, I believe they will live in the fantasy of their mind forever. From that point on, forever. They will just live up here. Their own perception of why they are where they are, what happened, how things worked out is going to be all down to their own personal perception.
It's a good question. It's actually a great question. Why have a do not touch tree at all? What was the point of that tree?
Well, that's the very thing. Yeah. It does seem like, that, but this is the thing, is that it's responsibility.
Yeah.
We have to have responsibility, how in the world you can't have it's like, why allow, so let me put it this way, let me parallel it with other things in life. Why do people, which we never did, but why do people baby proof their house? What are they teaching their kid by doing that? Are they teaching their kid that when they get older, they're going to have to be careful? No, they're teaching their kid that when you're that young, it doesn't matter what you do, because nothing hurts you. And so at what point are you going to teach them, okay, now you're 5, now you're 10, this can hurt you, so you shouldn't do it. At what point, are you going to do that? And so, there has to be some kind of, you have to have references of things. And the only way you can have references is you have to have things. And so, I mean, the question isn't, I understand the question, but let me put it this way. Is it, why are there not a lot of do not touch trees? Why only one?
Yeah.
Because only one is necessary.
Mm-hmm.
It's all that's needed is one. You only need one. Don't touch that. You can do everything else, but you can't touch that, to be able to establish the fact that there are things that are God's and there are things that are not. That you can eat freely. You can eat freely, that you can't touch this. And that's others. So it gives us a understanding that there are places in life where you shouldn't go. Really is what it comes down to. To learn how to not go to those places.
Yeah. So what about, let's talk. Well, we'll just keep going. Nobody's throwing any questions yet. So off-topic questions, totally welcome now. Go for it. Let's talk about the boundaries of laws.
Laws, meaning
laws. You can
what kind of laws?
Take your pick.
Well, no, it makes a big difference. You're talking about the laws of God or the laws of man?
Well, no, specifically the laws of God. Yeah. So we're talking about God's boundaries, okay. And so laws of physics. I mean, there's where does the law of sin come from? There's an interesting one. There's
well, the law. Okay, so most people will understand the laws of physics and understand that what we mean when we say laws of physics is not like we mean when we talk about laws of traffic. For example, because a lot of those laws have come into being as safety precautions. Mm-hmm. Where God's laws are not safety precautions. God's laws are. They actually have their own, justice system, like I said earlier, mm-hmm. And so these are things that they're not safety precautions. They're more of an operating manual, and so understanding God's laws is understanding how things work. And so that's an important element, to have in our lives, is how things work. It's very, very important. And the wonderful thing is, like for me, I don't know that everybody will be able to associate with this, and there may only be like 5 people who can associate with this out of 100. But when you know how things work, you're not inconvenienced with having to wait for somebody to show up who does, who knows how things work. So like when your washing machine breaks down, you don't have to wait for the washing machine repairman to come, or you don't have to wait until you've saved up enough money. And so in the meantime, nobody can wash clothes. Yeah. You can just go out there and fix it. Yeah. And you can fix it that afternoon, and it won't cost you very much, because you know how it works and you can fix it. And so I think, the idea of knowing how to fix things is important. And so when you know the rules, when you know God's rules and God's principles, then you know how to, well, you know more than just how to fix things. You know how to not break things as well. And so, this is the one that's on my mind. I mean, ever on my mind these last few days is just with marriages. It's just like, this has been marriage counseling from hell week, 2 weeks actually. And it's because they don't know the rules, of what makes a marriage work. They don't know them. It's not that they're breaking them. They don't know them. They are breaking them.
Yeah.
But they don't know them, and so now they have a broken marriage and they don't know how to fix it. And that's what I'm talking about is that they don't know they're breaking them. But the reason why they don't know they're breaking them is because they think that they can do it their way, and it doesn't work. You can't do it your way. That'd be like me going out in the garage and saying, "Oh, I don't know anything about washing machines, but I'm going to fix it. I'll just fix it my way." Mm-hmm. There's no way I'm going to fix it my way. I don't know what I'm doing. How can I fix it my way? I don't even have a way, so how am I going to fix it?
Yeah.
I'm just going to go in there. I'm going to grab a wrench. I'm going to grab a hammer. I'm going to grab a screwdriver, and I'm just going to start taking things apart. And I was talking to somebody on the phone. I was going to fix a printer cartridge, a printer toner, not a toner cartridge, but a toner drum. I mean, these things are super, super complicated. And I'm on the phone, I'm talking to him, and I'm taking the screws out, and I'm putting the screws here, there, and everywhere, and I'm talking on the phone, and I'm looking. By the time I'm finished, I realize I probably got about 70 or 80 parts in front of me. And I thought, there's no way I'm going to be able to put this back together. I wasn't paying enough attention. I scooped everything up and threw it all away. I was like, there's just no point. There's no point in trying to fix this because I wasn't able to pay enough attention. I was busy talking on the phone, and I didn't pay attention to what I was doing enough to be able to put it back together again. And I know how to put stuff together, but there was no way. I thought, I can make this work, but this is going to be hours and hours and hours of my time. $150 for a day's worth of lost life. Yeah, much better. and so I just said, forget it. I shouldn't have been talking on the phone when I pulled it apart. But this is the problem, is that people just like to pull stuff apart. They just want to pull everything apart, and they think they're going to be able to put it back together after they pulled it apart. You don't know what you're doing, and you're going to cause trouble. So knowing, that's why being obedient to God is such a great thing, is because you can't be obedient to God unless you know what God expects of you. And so if you are obedient, it's because you've taken the time to figure out what God expects of you. And so now you know how life works.
So what about, money? So this is another, I'm sorry, not money. This is another question I was going to ask. Need. Not money itself. Need. Right. Need. So we are not self-sufficient, right? And so we depend on externals.
Yeah.
Right. No matter where we are. Yeah. If Adam and Eve didn't eat any of the trees, they would have,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. We are dependent. Yeah,
right,
we are dependent. Yeah. We're not independent. Yes.
Yeah. So talk about that. Talk about need, operating within need.
Operating from within need in terms of what?
So it's interesting because it says that God sets the boundaries of our habitation, that we might find him or seek him and find him. So it says that there's something within these boundaries that we're searching for, or that we might be searching for. What creates that? How do we?
Oh, I don't know if it means that. I would think more from the standpoint of, we can only live on Earth. You get in a rocket ship and you can, right now, I mean, Elon's working on it, but right now, if you fly to Mars and you get out of the ship, it's over. Because it's not it's a boundary of your habitation.
Yeah.
And so I think it's more that. I don't think it's the idea of he's talking about from the standpoint of God putting limitations on what we can do as much as just the mere fact of our existence. Because there isn't, there is a lot of room. There's a lot of room to move around. God isn't limiting us by any stretch of the imagination any more than he would be limiting us to earth.
Mhm.
That's if you see earth, living on earth as a limitation, an imposed limitation by God, then you would, yeah, okay, fine. But I don't think most people could actually see it that way, that having to live on earth is a limitation. You might see it as a limitation if you're kind of like jacked up in your thinking, you don't like people,
Mhm.
you don't like sunshine, things like that. Then okay, yeah. But now we're talking about another dimension that.
So, but what about like the concept of being in a position to seek God? Like, what would create that need? What would create us wanting to look for God at all?
Oh, to go look for God.
Yeah, yeah. 'Cause
Well,
he says that they might seek him.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so you're talking about God, yeah. Well, let me rephrase it so I've got it right. So basically what you're saying is the idea that God has created this sort of vacuum in us that makes us seek after him. So there is something left out of us that we might seek him. I guess
I'm asking, is that the case?
Okay. So because
like what does that?
I would say that there is. I would say there is because
I really didn't want to sound cliche. It's why I didn't ask a question like that.
Yeah, but I would say there is because, we have to be, at some point, I love zooming out. When it comes to questions like this, the farther out you zoom, the better it gets because you can short circuit your thinking. And that's a stupid concept. Why would God put any kind of limitation? Why would he why would he do that just so we find? Well, to answer a very seemingly complex question, very simply, if you don't know something is interested in you, then you're not going to be interested in it. You have to know.
Yeah.
Somehow you have to know that there's something interested in you. I remember there was a girl in our church, and this guy really, really liked her, and he wanted to marry her. And he talked to me about it, but he was really super reluctant to talk to her about it. Well, I knew that there was another guy that was interested in her as well. He wasn't in the same church; it was a different church, and I knew he was
sounds like
interested in her as well.
my first experience talking about your daughter.
And I'm listening to this, and I think it's a great idea. He's a good guy. She's a good girl, and the two of them together would be fantastic. But she's saying, I just, I don't know. This guy's shown an interest in me. He's from another church and this and that. And I'm going, yeah, okay. And she says, I says, so there's nobody in church that has any interest? She says, well, there is, but he doesn't seem to be interested in me at all. She mentions the guy's name. And I'm like, oh, the last thing I want to do is put on 500 pounds, wear a dress, and hold a star in my hand to become fairy godmother. I don't want to go there. And it's like, what if I told you he is kind of interested in you? What? Oh, that changes everything. And I'm like, she didn't know he was interested. He never told her he was interested. And if I didn't say anything, she would end up marrying somebody else. It's like, how in the world are we going to seek after God if we have no concept that God's even there to be sought after?
Yeah.
There has to be something there. Now, granted, heaven forgive me for a poor illustration because the two don't compare by any stretch of the imagination. But in human terms, I think it puts us in the right perspective. But anyway, so that's the idea is that you have to realize that we're not going to find God on our own. We're not going to go look after God. This is the thing I think is interesting about the whole idea of evolution that just baffles me, is that there's nothing in the human mind that will seek after things that we have no idea of. We don't just go conjure up things out of nothing. We build on concepts. Everything that we think of on the basis of concepts. Even fantasy stories come out of the basis of the stretching of reality. It doesn't come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And so the idea that we even have a concept of God, what reality was stretched, if evolution is true, if it's just down to evolution, how would we stretch all of this? Why would we stretch all this? Why would we even want to build communities? Why would we even want to do any of the things that we do that are not that personally fulfilling? Why would we do any of those? We just wouldn't. We wouldn't. We don't even do things that the number of people that I know that say, I don't like this kind of food. How do you know? I know I won't. You've never even tried it and you won't. No, because that's human nature. It's human nature. If there's something we don't like or have an interest in, we don't have a like for it or an interest in it. It's just the way that works. Something has to create interest, and so somewhere along the way, God created an interest. So that's why.
Okay. I have to ask the question though. Did they end up getting married?
Yes.
Okay. So win. I'm out of questions.
And I didn't have to gain 500 pounds.
Oh, man. Well, no off-topic questions tonight.
Yay.
I had enough.
Time for ice cream.
Keep it going. Ice cream actually sounds really good. Anyway, so we will be here again next week. The following week, we will be doing something a little different. We will probably be streaming. I'm imagining we'll be streaming the conference, right? Following after. So after next week is the conference.
Oh, you mean for the Tuesday?
Yeah.
For the Tuesday. Yeah. So that Tuesday during the week of conference, we won't be. Is that 2 weeks? No.
2 weeks.
Is it 2 weeks?
2 weeks from now.
Really? 2 weeks. Wow, it's quick.
Fast.
Yeah.
Yes. Time to prep. Anyway, we're glad you joined us tonight. Thanks for the questions and the involvement. And we encourage everybody listening to join us tomorrow in person. We'll be here live with no delay, no screen, in person. Come and join us. Be a part of it. See for yourself what we're preaching and what we're talking about is real, and you can experience it for yourself. We'll be here at 7 o'clock tomorrow. Service starts. We open an hour early to pray, so you can come early. If you'd like to join us, and more to come soon. We'll see everybody next week.